Howdy ladies and gents, my name is Thom Gibson, and in this video I'm going to be talking about how you can do time lapses a little bit more professionally. I did a video previously that I'll link right here on how you can do time lapses by just filming and then speeding up the film in post-production. But in this video I'm going to be talking about how to do time lapses by using photos instead of video, taking a photo every few seconds and then putting them together to create the time lapse. The main tool to do this is an intervalometer. I didn't know why it was called that until I realized that the root word was interval, so it's a remote that you can control how often you want the picture to be taken. The pros of using an intervalometer instead of just doing video and then speeding it up in post-production is that it takes up a lot less space, because really when you're taking video, you're actually taking 24 frames or 24 photos every second, and then when you end up speeding it up, you lose a lot of that. But if you're just taking a photo every 2, 3, 5 seconds, that's a lot less space. When I'm doing time lapses with my T3i or 60D, I set the photo quality to large file format instead of RAW, because RAW is actually going to take up a lot more space, and since I do most of my editing in Premiere Pro, you can't actually just import RAW photos into Premiere Pro without converting them first, so it's a lot more of a hassle. So I did a few experiments, one with shooting clouds and one with shooting traffic to show the difference between time lapses for things that you don't want motion blur because clouds aren't moving fast enough for motion blur, and things like traffic where you do want that kind of smeary look. So let's take a look at the cloud one first. If I want this to be a 5-second time lapse, and I know that my timeline is going to be 24 frames per second. Let's think of it as 25 frames, so the math is a little bit easier. 25 frames per second times 5 seconds is 125 frames. So I need 125 pictures to make this 5 seconds long. Since the clouds aren't moving very fast, I'm going to set the interval at 5 seconds. So if it takes 5 seconds to get one picture, to get one frame, that's 125 frames times 5 seconds each. That's 625 seconds that this is going to have to go, which is about 10.5 minutes. So I'll do this for 10.5 minutes. As far as the actual settings, it's a pretty bright day, so I jacked up the aperture to 36 on here, and since I'm not really gonna get any motion blur since the clouds are moving so slow, I have my shutter speed at 100. I'm also gonna use this ND filter, which is an option if it gets too bright, because I can't actually raise my aperture anymore, but with this filter, I can kind of block a little bit more of the light out by rotating this filter. I have my ISO set on automatic, mainly because the clouds are kind of blocking the sun for portions of it and then unblocking it, and so I don't want it to get too white or too bright or too dark, so I'm going to just keep it on auto ISO. During sunrises or sunsets, you want to just keep it on manual so that way you actually get that change in light. On the intervalometer, I keep the delay at 0, the long at 0. The interval I have set at 5 seconds, and then you can actually control the number of pictures. I just set that down to infinite by clicking on it and then pressing the down button, and then I click on start. So now let's take a look at the different settings you need if you want to do something that's going to have a little bit more motion blur for things that are moving a bit faster, like vehicles or people. I'm in a brighter situation. Whenever I want to get more of that motion blur in my time lapses, I usually keep the shutter speed open longer. But in this case, the longer it's open, the more light it's taking in. I've pulled my ISO as low as I can bring it on this one. I've raised my aperture as high as I can raise it on this one as well. And so the only variable that I have to adjust light left is going to be my shutter speed. Currently my shutter speed's on 4, which is 1/4 of a second. Any longer than that, I'm worried that it's going to start washing out the image. Another thing that I'm doing with this one is it's a zoom lens, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that way it brings in a little bit less light. And I've got a polarizing filter on the end of this one as well to bring in less light. I'm going to try to do an 8-second time lapse. If I know it's going to be 24 frames per second, I'm going to round to 25 to make the math easier. 25 times 8 is 200 frames. So I need to take 200 pictures with this one. I'm gonna go for 3 seconds. So I have 200 frames. It's gonna be 3 seconds for each frame. So that's 600 seconds. 600 seconds is gonna be about 10 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and go for 12 minutes just to get a little bit more than I need. In that last video, since it was so bright, I wasn't able to keep the shutter open super long, so I wasn't able to get the exaggerated motion blur that I typically get. But I've done different time lapses earlier in the morning when it's not as bright, and you can kind of keep that shutter speed open longer and get that motion blur that's a little bit more prominent in your shots. Once you actually get your time lapses, there's a few things to keep in mind as you import into Premiere Pro. I was running into the problem where I was taking a long enough time lapse. Whenever I imported into Premiere Pro, it ended up being a lot shorter than what I anticipated. So if I thought it was 5 seconds, it was only like a little bit over 3 seconds, and I wasn't sure why. I was pretty sure I was doing my math right, but I figured out why it was doing that. And to avoid doing that, you'll want to go into Premiere Pro and go to File, Preferences, Media, and there's a little spot that says Indeterminate Media Time Base. And originally mine was set at 60 frames per second, and that means it was importing my footage as a 60 frame per second shot. But my timeline was going to be a 24 frame per second project. And so I think I was losing some frames in there. So to fix that, change the indeterminate media time base to whatever your final product's going to be. Since mine is always 24 frames per second, I changed mine to 23.976 frames per second. There's some weird math stuff behind why it's not 24 and it's 23.967. But since with my camera footage, when I'm shooting 24 frames per second, it actually is 23.976. So really, I'm just trying to keep it all the same. So you just see what your actual camera frame rate is, what your timeline frame rate is, and then set that indeterminate media time base to whatever that is. Be sure if you have to change it that you close out of Premiere and then reopen it again before you import the footage. And to import it, you just go to Import and then find the very first image in your time-lapse pictures and check the box that says Image Sequence, and that tells Premiere Pro that this is the first picture of a time-lapse, and I want to bring it in as a video clip and not a bunch of still photos. And once you bring it in, it is likely going to be much larger than the frame size of your timeline. So if you just right click on it and say scale to frame size, you might have to zoom in just a little bit just to get rid of some of that black space. Then you have your time lapse ready to go in Premiere. And so those are some of the things that I try to keep in mind when I'm doing time lapses. If you don't have an intervalometer, this newer brand intervalometer is about 20 bucks on Amazon, and I'll link it below. If you have any questions about this, go ahead and leave a comment right below the like button down there. And if you're interested in more videos like this, consider subscribing, and thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.